Okay, we're going to keep rolling. Remember our question we ended with last week? Should American Christians support open borders and all immigration, legal and illegal, because it's the loving thing to do for those seeking a better life? That was kind of one of the questions I asked at the very beginning last week, but I kind of left it hanging at the end when we were finishing up. And it's a tough question because it deals with this idea of being loving and compassionate and helping the needy or the poor. But there's also the other element, which is what? The law, right? And so Christians are faced with this. What do I do? Do I take care of this group of people that needs help, or what do I do? So that's what we're going to navigate through today. A couple questions. This is one thing we need to think about. Compassion at a personal level is different than responsible enforcement at a government level. Do you agree with that? I mean, how we should conduct ourselves individually with our neighbors, those around us, that's what Jesus talks to. That's what he speaks to. And if we change personally and we impact others positively, what will happen up the ladder? Probably the government will change, won't it? Because if hearts change and the government's made of people and their hearts are now different, what's going to happen to the government? It's probably going to change. Right? In fact, if you think about it, in history, the Christian was pretty much an outcast at the very beginning of Christianity. I mean, it was persecution. Rome was not in favor of them. But as Christianity spread, what happened eventually to Rome?
It fell.
It did, but they even came to what I guess you could loosely call a Christian emperor, with Constantine. I don't know that I would say he's the best Christian guy, but he obviously thought that was the banner in which he wanted to operate, and all of a sudden Christianity became legal in Rome. So as things change, as people change on an individual level, it can transform things on a massive level, right? I mean, think about what would happen if we could change the hearts of people in our country for Christ. Every individual heart would be changed. Outside of legal stuff, outside of enforcing it legally, what would happen if hearts changed on a lot of these topics? We wouldn't need these laws, would we? You wouldn't have to worry about some of these things because they would just have no interest. People wouldn't have anything to do with them. So we have to keep in mind that personal interactions, the personal level is different than the government level. Government has a specific role. We have a role. Here's Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says this, "But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer, but whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. And the one who wants to go to court with you and take your tunic, let him have your outer garment also. And whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." Maybe some of the most misunderstood statements out there. Now, the question is, who's Jesus directing this instruction toward? Who's the recipient of this instruction? Is it the government? Is he talking to the federal government? Is he talking to the Roman government? No. He's actually standing on the mount giving a sermon to a bunch of people, a bunch of individuals. A lot of outcast people, his disciples actually, I think is who specifically it's directed to. And why is he telling them this? Because if you operate under this banner as a government, what would happen? You wouldn't be one very long, would you? Think about it. Hey, do not resist the evildoer. Okay, the government takes on that particular rule. We will not resist evil. What happens to society? The nation goes into chaos, right? What happens if the government says, "You want to borrow from us?" We always say yes. Maybe that's not that far off, maybe. What happens to the financial state of the government? It's terrible, right? Yeah. So what's Jesus really trying to get at here with this statement? The personal conduct of you toward whom? Yeah, your fellow man. In fact, people even who are not treating you the best. Should we repay evil with evil as individuals? No. I mean, what's the goal? Transform the heart of the individual. show them grace and mercy, even though it may not fit how you want. Now, I don't think Jesus here is saying, think about the last one. Somebody wants to borrow from you, you always let them borrow. Is that great advice? What does he mean by that? Does he mean literally anybody that ever asks me to borrow some money, I should let them borrow money?
Don't expect it back.
Don't expect it back. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Because is there times where we should use wisdom to say, that's not someone I want to allow borrow money, because guess what they're going to do with it? They're going to do things that are harmful with it. So does Jesus say, forego wisdom and just give your money? No. But one of the things when we give, what should we expect? We should put and say, I gave freely. And yeah, we have deals where you need to be paid back, but what if you don't? Those are the types of things that people were doing, throwing out each other in jail and all these things. And Jesus is saying, how do we individually interact personally? What should our heart conditions be when we have these individual circumstances? Are we freely giving to people like we should? Are we repaying evil with evil? This is about personal interactions amongst us interacting with other people. And specifically, he's telling the disciples this because what are the disciples about to do? Go out into the world, and who are they supposed to reflect? Right, exactly. And so to just say, well, you see, the government should be operating on this level because the rules apply to all, that doesn't necessarily work. There are distinct roles and responsibilities of personal responsibility, and then there's also government or the authority's responsibility, and they are not always the same. They should operate under the same compassion and care, but they have different responsibilities in how they carry some of these things out. Here's Romans 13. We've read this one probably every week. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except by God, and those that exist are put in place by God. So then, the one who resists authority resists the ordinance which is from God, and those who resist will receive a condemnation on themselves. So this sounds like an authority type verse. God has put someone in authority, and he's telling the people, you better adhere to that. Is that just a blatant rule? Should we always, every single instance, if the authority speaks it, we have to obey it in every instance?
No. It depends if it's against God.
That's right. So that you can't, it's kind of like what Jesus said. We can't take these things and just universally say, in every circumstance, in all places, in all times, in all people, this has to be applied this way. We have to be able to say, what is the intended meaning? What is the audience? And that way we can differentiate here. So we're talking about if we can submit in a God, allowed manner, we should. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean you should fight against it all the time. Can you do it? So who's this directed towards? Yeah, individuals under the government, right? And we have to understand that if you resist the authorities, what could happen to you? Punishment. In their mind, you may say it's, hey, I'm doing the right thing, but they may say, listen, we made a rule, you broke it. You're going to pay for it, even if you had every good intention. Is the relationship between person to person different than the relationship between government to person? I can easily say, as a person dealing with someone else, listen, you borrowed from me, I let you borrow, you didn't pay back. As a good token, as love for you, I'm going to do what Christ did and forgive the debt. Now that's an individual circumstance, you have to weigh that, but I could do that as a personal thing. If the government does that, for one, and they're responsible for keeping the order, that creates a problem, do you see? Student loan debt, hey, we're going to forgive all the student loans. I paid for my school. I worked for 10 years at an insurance company so I didn't have $1 of debt when I graduated. It took me 10 years to get my degree. Where's my money? That's the request a lot of people ask us. How come I worked hard? And you see, the government's responsibility is to make sure that it's fair, right? So it is different. There's no question. Person to person is different than government to person. We're going to look at some of that today. So let's talk about some person-to-person interactions. This is the Beatitudes. So if somebody says, let's take the Beatitudes and say, the government, we should all be pacifists in our foreign policy and so on. That's not what the Beatitudes are talking about. That's not what this is for. Love and pray for your enemies. Can that be done in both levels? Yeah, of course you can. But do I have the authority to necessarily go take vengeance on the enemy, punish them for the wrong they did? Whose responsibility is that? Yeah, it's the authority's job, the government's job. Don't retaliate, we're even told, right? Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And then in Romans 13, God says, oh, by the way, I put these people in place. They're called governments, and they carry the sword. So by the way, I may use them to bring about retaliation on the wrongdoer. But you personally, you don't do it. What if you're a person who's employed by the government? What if you're the one with that responsibility? Now you have even a greater responsibility because you have to differentiate personal between responsibility. People do that all the time. If you're a police officer, you're in law enforcement, you probably have to break these things down. Where's my role in my authority that's been given to me as a police officer? What is my role as an individual person? Right? We have to separate those things to some degree. Reflect Jesus in your personal conduct. Would you agree with that? That's the instruction. It's kind of I'm just summing up the Beatitudes. Look like Jesus. That's really what it comes down to, right? Abstain from harmful behavior and rule over your feelings. That's an important one. These are where he talks about lust and anger, and if you hated your brother, you've already murdered them, so don't hate them. See, these are the things Jesus is saying personally I want you to do. I want you to get control of. These, when allowed to grow, will lead to the damaging of others. Personal responsibility. How do I act and reflect more like Christ in my personal life? Again, personal life. This is not me as a government official. Understand? That's kind of the point here. Be charitable toward those in need, but don't seek the glory he talks about in the Beatitudes. Help the needy. That doesn't mean go out and we need government established things to hand out or whatever. What should I be doing personally? What if everybody did that? What if everybody from a personal standpoint said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to help the poor. Jesus even said the poor are always going to be with you. That used to be the case. The churches were the ones that helped the needy before the government got involved. It was the churches who came in and helped. The government just stayed out of that. But now what's happened? See how the roles have just kind of started to get all skewed? Not that there's not a case to be made for some maybe government help on some level, but the primary is our personal charity towards helping each other should come first, right? Don't judge. You heard this one. Don't judge. Now, first of all, is it really possible to not judge? We like the word discern. You're walking down the street, you see a real shady character on the side there. Maybe he's got a knife on his hip. Are you going to make a judgment call? I'm going to say, I don't think I'm going over there. I might go around the other way. That we would call discernment. That's different than I condemn this person to hell. Do you understand the difference of judgment and how we use it? Now, from a government standpoint, is the government's job to judge? We have judges that are there to say, you did what's wrong, you will be punished. That's part of the authority given to them by the government, right? By us as the voters. Matthew chapter 7. Here it is. You guys have heard this one. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For by what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And by what measure you measure out, it will be measured out to you. And why do you seek the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the beam of wood in your own eye? Or how will you say to your brother, allow me to remove the speck from your eye, and behold, the beam of wood is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the beam of wood from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Who said this? Jesus did. Do you notice what he's saying here is it's don't judge, it's don't judge wrongly. You notice what he says at the very end? First remove the beam of wood from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to do what? See, it's about correcting this person in the right way. If I see something going on that I know is not good and it needs to be corrected, but I'm doing the same thing, what's Jesus saying? You're in no position to fix the situation there until you fixed it here. So fix it here so you can go fix it there. That doesn't mean you can't make any judgment calls. You made judgment calls to just come to church today. Should I do this? Should I do that? Is that guy going to get in my lane? You're making constant judgments to determine what's safe and what's not, what's good and what's bad. That's different than you shouldn't condemn someone by being the judge, capital J. Okay, that's different. So, government to person. This is a little different. Romans 13. Protect the people of their nation. That's their job, right? Protect them. Should be. This is ideal government, what ought to be, right? Reward good, punish evil. Would you agree that these are the roles of government to person? Now that sounds kind of like a judgment statement. What do you mean reward good and punish evil? They have to have a general concept of good and evil, first of all. And then they have to be able to have the authority to do something about it. Does this require judgment by authority? It sure does. If they say you did evil and they make that judgment, then what are they going to do? They're going to punish you. That's the authority they've been given by Romans 13. Maintain order, prevent chaos and anarchy. That's probably maybe the big one. That goes right along hand in hand with enforcing the law. But if you don't have order, you have chaos. And when we went through Exodus, do you remember what Pharaoh's job was? What was his primary role in Egypt to do as Pharaoh? Maintain order. Yeah. They actually had a special Egyptian word for it. That was all he had to do. Keep order. Chaos was a no-no. So that was the job. So it doesn't matter what nation it is. It doesn't matter how far back in history you go. Governments, authorities in position have been tasked with order, keeping order, and preventing chaos. Right? That's what the role of the government is. Uphold the rule of law. Would you agree? Now, it's one thing to have a rule of law, and we're all subject to it. But someone has to have the authority to say if the law is broken, there has to be something for it, right? As an individual, I can go out and point out that someone wronged me legally, but I don't have the authority in most circumstances to actually punish the person who wronged me. So who do I have to go to? Someone with the authority to do that. So most people think 911, can you send the police? And then the police come and they arrest this person because guess what they've been given? The authority to do those things. That's different than the individual person. Okay, so there's a role kind of piece here. But they do have to uphold the rule of law. That's a requirement. Now that opens a whole other can of worms, doesn't it? Because you have good laws, you have bad laws. What happens when they don't uphold the rule of law? These are the questions going through our country right now. If it's not upheld, law becomes worthless, doesn't it? There's no point in having a rule if you don't follow it. That explains why God was so severe with his punishments if you broke the Ten Commandments in Israel. Because do you think he wanted his law revered more than any other law? Do you think he wanted people to understand how serious it was to break it? Oh yeah, if they do this, take them out and they die. Whoa, okay, that seems a little extreme, God. You think there was a general understanding that you better respect the rule of law? What happens when the people quit saying, we're just not going to go out and stone them anymore? We've kind of decided we don't really like that. What happens to the rule of law? Just disappears, becomes this thing with no power, worthless piece of paper, right? And so what you had was a law created, and then a group of people that were given authority to enforce the law. And when the authorities said, we will no longer enforce the law loses its power. See how those things all have to come together? Now, God could say, you didn't do it, so I'll just open the earth. And sometimes he did that kind of stuff, right? But he involves people in the process. And he says, I want you to obey and follow. And when they don't, bad things happen. Now, in the end, whether, because of God's long suffering, will his law be kept? Yeah, and you're either going to be in one of two camps. You're either going to be the camp that he's going to open the books and there's going to be all the legal violations of your whole life and you're going to be punished. Or it's going to be, I open the book, there were all your legal violations for your whole life, but there's a big blood stain on there and you get to go free. Right? You get to be invited. That's really the two camps. But the law will be enforced. It's either going to be enforced upon Jesus on your behalf, or it will be enforced on you, which is torment for eternity. Right? All debts are paid, period. All of them. So here's Romans 13:4. But if you do what is bad, be afraid. You like that? Because it's talking about the government, the authorities, does not bear the sword to no purpose. The sword has been given to the government for a purpose. For it is God's servant, the one who avenges for punishment on the one who does what is bad. So when God says, vengeance is mine, and then you read Romans 13, you go, well, what do you mean? How does he conduct his vengeance? This is one of the means of that. I have given the sword to the authorities in the government to avenge for wrongdoing. So it's really a high position. It really is to be in the government, because you're the one that's got to carry out God's rules. Number 2, enablement should not be redefined as compassion. This is a problem. A big problem. Here's John 8. You've heard this one. Now the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery, and standing her in their midst, they said to him, testing him, Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Legally, she's in trouble, right? Now, what's some key pieces before we get too far into the thing here? What are they trying to do?
Set him up.
Yeah, this is a setup. So the context is they're not really concerned about enforcing the law, are they? And that's the whole point. You're not really that interested in the law, because what are you trying to do? Trap me. And then we know how this ends. What does he do? Draws in the sand, he who is without sin, casts the first stone, and they all have to go away. Because the reality is, no one's interested in enforcing the law in this circumstance. That's not the point of this. It's about you trying to get me, and I'm catching you the fact that if I enforce the law, you're all toast, right? You're all adulterers. And so he says, so what do you say? Now they were saying this to test him so that they would have an occasion to bring charges against him. But Jesus, bending down, began to write with his finger on the ground, taking no notice. And when they persisted in asking him, straightening up, he said to them, the one of you without sin, let him throw the first stone at her. Is this compassion to the lady who's being brought before him? You could make that case, couldn't you? If she was in fact caught in adultery, what it appears she has, red-handed, caught. Yeah, the law says she's done. She's done. Is Jesus a government official? What's his role? I mean, he's the creator of governments. I mean, he's the creator of all. What's his role as he's standing here on earth with this group of people? The servant. The gracious one to come and bring forgiveness. Is that always going to be the case? Is Jesus always going to be coming and standing there as the gracious one?
He'll be the judge one day.
At some point, he's going to be the authority, right?
So he came to save people from himself.
Yeah, the wrath of God. We just talked about that when we were doing the gospel series here. He came to save people. That's his role. He never even speaks to what kind of government a person should have. Do you realize that? He doesn't talk about capitalism. He doesn't talk about socialism. He doesn't talk about any of that. Because what's he interested in?
Saving people.
Yeah, the kingdom of God, which is greater than any particular system of government, and how people can make sure they're in the kingdom, how they should conduct themselves in the kingdom of God. And so those other things will take care of themselves, I think, in his mind. If every person on the planet became a true Christ-following believer, what would governments look like? Would they be better? They should be naturally following. So Jesus shows compassion. I would agree with that. He was compassionate to this lady. Then it goes on to say, so Jesus straightened up, and seeing no one except the woman, so they all left, he said to her, where are those accusers of yours? Does no one condemn you? I'm not condemning you to death. There's no one left. And she said, no, Lord. So Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Period. That's the end of it. No, that's not the end of it. What does he say? Go and sin no more. So there's compassion, but there's not this, Jesus could have ended it there and says, neither do I condemn you. Have a great day. right?
Go back to what you were doing.
He could have not spoken at all to her sin that apparently she was caught in that brought her to him in the first place. But he actually does. And even though he shows compassion to her, he specifically says,
Go and not sin anymore.
don't do this anymore. But he also never says in here, by the way, the law's bunk. Like, just don't worry about the law anymore. I'm here, you don't need to worry about the law. Why does he tell her to go and sin no more? Like, why is that an important instruction? What if she says, okay, thanks for the nice sentiment, but I will go and continue to do what I'm doing? What is she running the risk of? She could get caught by the authorities and they could take her out and stun her to death. Or if she continues in this, what could she ultimately run into? Judgment from God. I mean, God's showing compassion to her, which he does to all of us. This is Romans. God shows his compassion to us to do what to us? To change our hearts so that our hearts will be transformed and we see his grace and his love and his mercy, and we'll repent. We'll say, I deserved this, but I got grace. I want to follow you and do it your way. And so God even tells us in Romans by Paul that God overlooked. He didn't remove them. But in the time that he knew was coming with Christ, he overlooked sins of many because he knew they were going to be paid for by Jesus. So in other words, I'm not going to enforce what I could enforce today because I'm going to take care of that later to spare the people of what they're owed. But he still tells the lady, if you don't change, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. So what did Jesus think of her sin that led to her apprehension by the Pharisees? It's not okay. You're running a risk. If you keep doing this, they'll recognize I'm here to bring grace and mercy and forgiveness. But that's not always going to be the case. And if you don't repent, what's going to happen? You're going to be punished. So does Jesus support the violation of law in order to show compassion? No, he doesn't. As an individual person coming with the mission of God, he comes to say, I'm here to show compassion and grace and truth and love to save people. He does not come in and say, by the way, I'm here to overthrow the government. Even that's what everybody wanted him to do. He doesn't come to change the law. He comes to change hearts so that people will act like they should and serve God. Receive forgiveness, serve God. But he doesn't come in and say the law is no longer enforced. In fact, I think I'm going to have a verse coming here in just a second. But here's one more instance. So Jesus heals this guy. And it says, after these things, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, look, you have become well. And he doesn't stop there. Look what he says next. Sin no longer lest something worse happen to you. Wow, thanks, Jesus. You healed me, but quit what you were doing, because if you keep doing it, it's going to be worse. He wanted to show compassion, but it was not enablement. It's not keep doing what you've been doing. In both instances, it's I'm giving you grace and mercy, but I'm telling you, you better stop. Right? Here it is. Do not think that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one tiny letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all takes place. Is Jesus anti-law? No, he's pro-law. He understands the value of law. He understands the importance of it. But that doesn't change the fact that what did he come to do? Save us from the law. Save us from the law. So these people were offered compassion and salvation from the law. And he's telling them, it better be different now. You better change, because you're running risks. And so if you don't have law, and God doesn't uphold the law, there's no point in having the law, there's nothing to be saved from, people can do whatever they want, because they don't think there's consequences in the end. Jesus instructed individuals how to personally interact with others in a way that would reflect him. Would you agree? Jesus did not, however, give a license to people to disregard the law. Because you're running a risk. That's the risk. If you disregard the law, the authorities have not been limited. They have not been handcuffed. They've not been removed. You are still subject to the law. That's different than I've come to save you from the consequences of violating God's law. For the ones shown compassion, they were faced with an opportunity. You either correct your actions in order to prevent future loss or damage, hence why he told these people quit doing this stuff, or they can fall under the judgment of a higher authority who is responsible for enforcing the law. Fill in whatever blank when I say higher authority. Could be the Jewish High Council, could be the federal government. It ultimately could be Jesus when he comes back, when Judgment Day arrives. So when Jesus comes again, will it be in compassion or judgment? I mean, so do you see kind of the, for lack of a better term, duality piece here? You have Jesus is still the judge, even though he's compassionate. So there's a saving element, and there's a judgment element. And the question is, we don't like the judgment element, we just like the saving element. And we have to recognize that judgment will be handed out, because all debts will be paid on everyone. The cross has been done, right? The compassion piece is fulfilled. It's up to you now. And now judgment depends on what you do with that information, what you do with that. So as the highest authority, he must, I bolded that for a reason, he must judge those who have made a willful decision to disregard the law of God. Why is that? Because if he doesn't, what happens to the law of God? Doesn't matter. What happens to the holiness of God? Doesn't matter. See how important it is to understand that it's not that we get into this, well, how does Jesus feel about judging people? I think he doesn't really feel like he wants to send people to hell when he comes back and judge. So he's not going to do it. His compassion should incite repentance, while his judgment will uphold righteousness. God likes what's right. Would you agree with that? And he will do whatever is necessary to uphold that. So here's some questions. Why is enablement of wrongdoing so dangerous?
It allows people to keep on doing what they're doing.
It undercuts the law, the ultimate law, because when you say you shouldn't do this, but that you enable it, what is that? Yeah.
You're giving them affirmation.
Yeah. The affirmation is a problem. Yeah, just go ahead and keep doing that. Go ahead and keep doing that. No problem. There's no be any consequences. That's why we have such a problem with some of our justice system stuff, because what do we get a lot? They slap somebody on the hand. They're really, I mean, you could call it consequence, but it's not in a level that we would say that's probably a good deterrent, you know. This is like a parenting thing you learn as you're, you know, when you're raising kids. You know, when you sit down and say, Johnny, do you understand what you did? You shouldn't have done that.
They say yes, and then
And they go, yeah. And then what do? They do it again 5 minutes later. There's a reason the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. There's a reason consequences have to come into play. Because if you don't have them, the kid says, your stupid laws I could care less about. And they're smart. Even at 2, 3, don't touch that. And then, okay, I got it. I'm not going to touch any. That hurt. It's fundamental, but look how much our society pushes back on this. We don't like consequences to doing what's wrong, do we? No consequences, please. And so what do? Enable. What if God, who's the authority, failed to correct wrongdoing? It's kind of the same question as above.
Our heart would not change.
Our hearts wouldn't change. We would have no deterrence from hurting ourselves, which is a lot of what God says, don't do this. It's because I don't want you, number one, to be destroyed by me. Number two, I don't want you to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. I mean, that's it. Love God with your whole heart. Love your neighbors yourself. That sums up the law. You don't want to get wrong with God, and you don't want to hurt somebody else. The best option is given by God is to allow for correction without eliminating the risk of judgment. I want to give you a chance to get this right before we have to bring the hammer down. That's kind of what God has said, isn't it? By the way, it cost him very dearly to make this possible by coming and dying on a cross. But that didn't take away the risk of judgment for those who would reject the cross, reject Christ. It's the same way in anything. You have a law, you have a rule that's been established. This is how you conduct yourselves. Just like God said, this is how you get to heaven. And you have a choice to either obey the law or reject the law. You obey it, what's going to happen? Blessings. Peace. It's going to be good. You reject the law, what happens? Punishment. It's just a universal principle to our cosmos. I mean, it's just how it operates. What would happen to those who had received Jesus' mercy or healing, yet decided to go back to their sinful lifestyles? The woman caught in adultery, the guy who was healed and then ran into Jesus again in the temple. What happens if they say, thanks, Jesus, but I'm not going to change? What risks are they running? Yeah, they could have another run-in with the authorities like we were talking about. You don't think that those Pharisees walking away from that conversation where Jesus embarrassed them said, she's going to pay for this? We don't know what happened to her. We really don't. But you don't think that maybe they had a target on her? We catch her in just this much, we'll take her out and kill her so fast. You don't think that they thought that? Who should bring the judgment within a nation when the individual or individuals do not respond to the warning or the correction? That's the real question in our study, is who is responsible for doing this from a national standpoint?
The ruler, the one in charge.
The one or the ones in charge, right? So the citizen in certain instances has been given authority to say, and again, this can even change by state, right? You have certain authority to take the, quote, law into your hands. Make my day laws, those types of things. Someone tries to break into your house, But ultimately, who's responsible for handling this? It's the government. It's the nation's leadership. Their job is to make sure that they correct and warn. And in some cases, they may have already thrown the warning out there. It's called notice. Don't do this or this will happen to you. You steal, we're going to arrest you. And so what happens? You either have to obey or you're going to be punished. I was looking at the law. It was, I think it was Proposition 47 a while back in California. Does anybody remember this? This is where they basically you could steal $900 or $950 worth of merchandise, and it would no longer be a felony. It was changed to be a misdemeanor. And so some people came out and said you can legally steal now in California. Not entirely true, because it's still a misdemeanor. But why is it still a problem when you go from felony?
Because nobody enforces the law.
Yeah, because, well, first of all, if it's a misdemeanor, it's not as serious as a felony, is it? And so now we're on,
Get fined.
yeah, okay, I got a fine. It does say up to 6 months in jail. I looked at the law this week. You could spend 6 months in local jail. There's people out there who say, for $950 in a warm bed, I think I might take the chance, But if all of a sudden it's more severe, now what? So you have to say, well, is the penalty in line with the crime to be a proper deterrent, right? And so when you start to create this enablement society, even if it's just not saying it's totally okay to steal, but you just start bringing the consequences down. You start bringing enablement up. You start bringing this down, you start bringing this up. And then what do people do? They take advantage. Take advantage of it. There's dozens, if not hundreds of stores that have closed in the San Francisco area because of why? Because people say it's only a misdemeanor. I think I'll take the risk of getting caught. And they come in and they steal stuff and they can't stop them. So now you see those pictures online where now they have the Tylenol and the stuff that you used to be able to just go get and put in your cart. It's all behind glass. Everything in the whole store is behind glass now. And so now you have to pay somebody, an employee that has to come and stand before that and crack it open every single time somebody wants to get a bottle of Tylenol out. The enforcement of law is extremely important. And if we start to take law and make it lesser, not as severe, it enables people. So it's the government's responsibility, exclamation point. You make sure that you correct this stuff. So let's talk about immigration. Now that we've kind of got a little background, I want you to just think about person to person, government to person, and the consequences of enablement. There is no biblical basis for Christians to support illegal immigration regardless of reason for the violation of the law. Which there's no verse that says you are entitled to immigrate. There's no verse on that. And so if you can do something in the right way, according to the Bible, should you do it? Of course. Always try to do it by the rules. Always. And if you can, you should go that route. So if I say I don't want to do that, it's too hard. It's too difficult. It's too much of a pain. And I break the law, is the Bible going to support me? Compassion does not eliminate the rule of law. Christians have to understand this. we should be compassionate. Personally, we should love people. We should seek their what's good for them. Support the one who's been outcast. But we cannot do that by compromising the law. Someone comes in and they say, I just committed murder. I'm here at this church because I know the church will have compassion, that they'll love me, that they'll give me a safe place. And we say, you know what, we care about you. We're going to pray for you. But guess what we should also be doing? We've got to call the police if you're not going to turn yourself in, which I would probably say if you just killed somebody, we're probably calling the police. We're not going to give you a chance to turn yourself in. Because there is responsibility for breaking the law. And most law, at least good law, is to protect other people from harm, right? The only instance in which Christians can biblically support breaking the law is when it violates God's law. There's a hierarchy. God's law, every other law made by man. So the best thing to do would take God's law and build your law based on God's law. Then there's no conflict. But we've kind of gotten away from that, even though in the Supreme Court, what do they have all over the walls and doors? The Ten Commandments. For now. Daniel 3, therefore at this time some astrologers came forward. You guys remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They denounced the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, may you live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, and the drum, and all kinds of music, he shall fall down and shall worship the statue of gold. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into the midst of the furnace of the blazing fire. Bad law. But this is a pagan nation. What do you expect? Right? They don't understand good law. They do morally just in their being. But this is a bad law. However, there are Judean men whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. These men, O king, pay you no heed and were not serving your God, and the statue of gold that you have set up, they are not worshiping. Problem, individuals, these are actually government officials because they're actually over a province, and they will not obey the government's new rule. Why? Why won't they obey it? Because God's law is, you shall worship me and me alone. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need on this matter to present a defense to you. That's probably not going to go over real well. If it is so, our God, whom we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And from your hand, O king, let him rescue us. And if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and the statue of gold that you have set up we will not worship. It's a good response, but they understand the risk. Do you see what they said? We believe God will rescue us, but if he doesn't take us from the fire of the furnace, you're still going to know that we're not doing it because it's not right. It violates ultimate law, God's law. So here's just some things to observe with this. These three men, although Jews, were living amongst Babylonian society and rules. There's no indication that they were rebels. In fact, they were actually enforcing Babylonian law because they were over the province of Babylon. There's no issue here until the law steps out, the Babylonian law steps out of its authority limits in their mind, which is no. Creator God has to be worshipped in him alone. You guys have overstepped your bounds here. These three men, they broke Babylonian law due to follow God's law. So that was the key. I'm only breaking this because I'm required to. The men were subject to the punishment of Babylonian law if caught, which they were caught. And what did they recognize? The law could crush us. Babylonian law could destroy us here, could cost us our lives. And they were willing to say, that's fine, I guess. I mean, it's not fine, but it is what it is. We're not going to violate God's law. We're not doing it. If God saves us, great. If he doesn't, there's no removal of the Babylonian law here. Do you realize that? They never came in and said, get rid of the law. God spared them from the furnace, not the law. Do you realize that? The law got them into the furnace, and God said, bad. I'm not putting up with this. Take them out. But they never overthrew the law. It wasn't a battle from that standpoint. The violation only impacted the three men. You realize that? The rest of the people in the Babylonian kingdom could do what? They could bow down, they could worship the golden image all they wanted. But these three men said no. Theirs did not impact the other people. Now, Nebuchadnezzar knows that if these guys rebel and I allow it, what happens?
The others will.
The others will too. And that's where he's faced with the problem. Is that as the government, do I enable these three guys to do this? Or do I crush them so that I have complete control over everybody else under the rule of law? So the rule of law is still being enforced. And you know, it's really weird because Nebuchadnezzar, as much as he's not a great guy, he's doing what a ruler should do with a law. If I pass a law and you don't abide by it, you're going to have the responsibilities of the judgment of the law. Now, it's a bad law, but he's following it, and God recognizes that as an important concept, even on a bad law. So he doesn't stop the law. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are never recorded as going in and taking some action to overthrow the law. There was never some religious response that God overthrew their legal system in order to get rid of the law, did he? As soon as they get thrown into the fire, he says, now I can assert my power over you, Nebuchadnezzar, and your authority, which is you don't take anybody's life that I don't allow for. And he saves them. And then you can bet there was probably like this, okay, we got to get rid of this rule. This is bad, So here's some stats. These are old ones, but I just want you to get an idea of that scenario versus where we're at. So this is 22 years ago. Old stats. You can bet it's a lot worse now. Okay? Estimated 13 million illegal immigrants in the U.S. This was 22 years ago. So it's probably worse now. Would you agree? People who have violated the law of the country in which they intended to enter. That's the first thing you do when you come to a country is you say, what are the rules? And they say, doesn't matter. We're coming in. And we have X, Y reasons. They can be the nicest reasons ever. I'm not talking about compassion. And yes, that's a great reason. I'm talking about strictly legal because remember, the authorities have the job of enforcing the law. These individuals could have come legally through the process regardless of its difficulty, but chose a shortcut of sorts. Would you agree? So you could come through a process. So what kind of impact does this legal violation have on the other people of the nation?
Financial.
Does it have an impact? Maybe it would be the first question. Oh yeah, it does. So this is not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is we're going to violate law, and it's not only going to potentially harm us, but it's going to harm a bunch of other people. So here's some more stats. Again, these are old stats, so it's going to be a lot worse. As of 2002, Center for Immigration Studies stated $26.3 billion in costs on the federal government from that. This was 2002. However, the illegal immigrants only paid an estimated $16 billion in taxes. So when you do the math, it came down to approximately a $10.4 billion deficit. And so the question now is, who's impacted negatively by the deficit?
Everybody.
Yeah, anybody else that's here, right?
Pay taxes.
So the most impacted systems, what are they? The healthcare or the medical system, the insurance system, food assistance programs, right? School system, prison and court system. This is coming from the stats from 2002. Okay, I didn't just come up with these. These are just the ones that are most.
Housing problem.
Housing problem could be. That wasn't on this list, but again, this was 20 years ago. And do these impact the other people in the country? Absolutely. Absolutely they do. Here's the bottom line. Compassion without accountability leads to enablement. Enablement does additional damage to the individual directly while also hurting those around them. You can think of anybody that's dealing with drugs or alcohol or any other thing. If you just say, let me just give it to you, it's only going to just destroy them. And think of the harm to everybody else. Failure to enforce law leads to enablement of law breaking. True? Law breaking without penalty always leads to more law breaking. Christians are only authorized to break the law if it contradicts a command of God. So in other words, we should be pro-law enforcement, pro-law, as long as that law is not against God. Christians should always look for a way to comply within the allowance of Scripture. Can I do this in a peaceable way? Can I do this in a rightful way?